All right, go right ahead.
Oh, all right, perfect. Thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. It's 9 a.m. I'm going to call the House E&A Committee to order. I have a little script I have to read. As chair of the Environment and Agricultural Committee, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with House Rule 67 and the governor's emergency order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. This is a public hearing on bills referred to the committee. An executive session may follow. Please note that there is no physical location for members of the public to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting. However, in accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that all members of the committee and select legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting through the Zoom electronic meeting platform, and the public has access to contemporaneously listen and, if necessary, participate in this by the Zoom platform or by telephone. Necessary access information has been made available in the House calendar and through the electronic calendar on the General Court website. The notice for this meeting complies with House rules and ISA 91A. When accessing the meeting should call 271-3600 or email hcs@ledge.state.newhampshire.us. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled. Christina Daly is the staff assisting us today. Please note that all votes that are taken during this session shall be done by roll call vote. Let's start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. When each member states their presence, please also state whether there is anyone in the room with you during this meeting, which is required under the right to know law. So sitting in as our clerk today is my vice chair, Representative Aaron. So if you would please call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First on our roll call, Chairman Howard Pearl.
I am here in the committee room.
Vice Chairman Judy Aaron, I am here. Representative Comtois. Representative Comtois. Representative Verval. Representative Verval. Representative Davis.
I'm here in the committee room.
Representative Stapleton. Representative Stapleton. Representative Mola.
I am here. I'm in my home. I'm alone in my room, but my husband is working from home.
Thank you. Representative Kennedy. Representative Kennedy. Representative Mason.
I am here in my office in my home in Claremont, New Hampshire, and am alone.
That's Representative Stapleton. Good morning. Representative Sanborn.
I am here in my home all by myself.
Representative Bixby.
I am present in my home in Dover, and I am by myself. And just a separate note for Christine. Representative Pearl's audio seems to be really crackly, so if you could look into that at some point, thanks.
Thank you.
Representative Sofakidis. Representative Sofakidis. Representative Bolden. Representative Bolden. Representative Dutsey. Representative Dutsey. Representative Murray.
Representative Murray here. I am in my yard.
Representative Von Plinsky. Representative Von Plinsky.
Just a point of order, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead.
A couple of members are not able to find the Zoom link.
Okay, I will go ahead and send them out, Mr. Chair, and I will have the IT department come look at your mic because you are going in and out. I think it might be the chip.
Representative Kaplan? Representative Kaplan? Representative Hyland?
Yes, Rep Highland is here. My video is off to kind of help with my broadband issues, but I'm here alone in my office. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Representative Perez? Representative Perez? Okay, that's it. Chairman Pearl will be with us momentarily.
Sorry, I was trying to find another mic here I could use. Okay, sorry about the technical difficulties. Is that any better on the volume of the voice quality? Anybody out there hear me?
It's about the same. I'm going to contact IT, but and then I'll be sending out the extra Zoom links when people come in. I'll let you know.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, we're going to open up a presentation, and my apologies for the technical difficulties here to those folks that are presenting, but we will we'll make the best of it, and we'll be able to hear you, and hopefully before I have to say too much, you can hear me again. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. And I'll apologize if I get your name, Dr. Shaiko, is that correct?
Yeah, Shaiko, Ron Shaiko.
Shaiko, okay, thank you very much. Dr. Shaiko, I appreciate you and the students coming today.
It's our pleasure. So on behalf of the class of 1964 Policy Research Shop at the Nelson A. Rockefeller Center at Dartmouth, we have two presentations to make today, one on pesticides and neonicotinoids, the other on solid waste management. And I've talked with Chairman Pearl, and I think we'll start with the neonicotinoids group. That would be Paridi, Emily, and Jeremy. And we'll turn the floor over to them. And we're hoping for a 15-minute presentation with 15 minutes of discussion, and then we'll go to the second project after that. So I'll turn it over to Emily, Paridi, and to Jeremy.
Look forward to it. So go ahead and we'll go ahead and do the presentation, and then we'll hopefully be able to ask you some questions.
Sorry, one moment. Can everyone see my screen? Okay. So good morning, everyone. Thank you to Chairman Pearl and the Environment and Agriculture for hearing our testimony today. My name is Paridi Kapadia, and I, along with my group members, Emily Liu and Jeremy Rodriguez, have compiled a presentation to showcase our research on the topic of pesticides and neonicotinoids on behalf of the Policy Research Shop at Rockefeller Center. So with that, I'll pass the baton to Jeremy, who will begin with a brief overview of pesticides.
Hi, everyone. So just to clarify, this particular section will only cover pesticides. And to introduce them, we conducted a literature review of the effect of pesticides on human health. So in our review, we found a considerable body of research explaining the detrimental effects of pesticides to the human body. Pesticides can cause immediate health effects on contact, such as rashes, blisters, blindness, nausea, and even death in some cases. They can also cause long-term health effects. Some of the literature we reviewed found connections between Alzheimer's disease and organophosphates and organochlorines, asthma and herbicides, birth defects like spina bifida and nitrates, brain cancers and insecticides and herbicides, and a number of other diseases linked to pesticide exposure. In our analysis, we also noted the higher rates of health issues among farmers and agricultural workers. An estimated 44% of farmers are poisoned by pesticides every year, according to recent studies. And some of this burden is due to close proximity to pesticide application and phenomenons like pesticide drift, which is essentially chemicals that do not reach the target crop that is then carried away by wind. And with some application technologies, only 10% of the pesticide actually reaches the target crop, and that pesticide drift can reach as far as 50 miles from the original site. This occupational risk of farmers also affects their families. One study found increased concentrations of pesticide metabolite in the urine of children of farmers. Exposure can occur either by direct pesticide drift or from farmers carrying pesticides on their clothing. And protective equipment is mandated by the Worker Protection Standard, but we found many studies citing that farmers still experience significant exposure, even when wearing WPS recommended clothing practices. Lastly, migrant and seasonal farm workers are arguably at the highest vulnerability because of their social, economic, and linguistic marginalization that are exacerbated by occupational hazards, poverty, and poor living conditions. They're also more likely to be paid less and experience more occupational injuries and illness related to pesticide exposure. Now I'll pass it on to Emily, who will delve into neonicotinoids more specifically.
Thanks, Jeremy. To shift gears a little bit, now we're going to be focusing specifically on neonicotinoids, or neonics for short, which are a widely used neurotoxic insecticide. And so like nicotine, it binds to nerve cells, and in insects, this overstimulates them and ultimately kills them. In terms of usage, neonics are applied in over 120 different countries and have 140 different crop uses, including rice and cotton. And some non-agricultural applications include golf courses, lawns, and gardens. And here's a map of imidacloprid usage in the US, which is one type of neonic. And as you can see, it is widely used throughout the country. And neonics are particularly effective against sap-beating insects such as aphids. And in New Hampshire, neonics are frequently used in apple orchards. So neonics are water soluble, which means that they dissolve when in contact with water. So they can be applied to the soil or sprayed, but they're primarily used as a seed treatment, which means that all parts of the plant will take up the neonic as the plant grows, and the neonic is present in the pollen and nectar. And treating seeds reduces the need for multiple pesticide sprays, which makes coated seeds a widely used option. For example, in 2015, between 79 and 100% of corn seed was actually already pre-coated with neonics. And here's a table that sums up some agricultural manufacturers that include neonic compounds in their products. And as you can see, a lot of these are household names. To talk briefly about pesticide regulation in the state, the Division of Pesticide Control within the New Hampshire Department of Agriculture, Markets, and Foods oversees pesticide licensing in the state. And so licensing involves exams and applications, and the division issues licenses to both commercial and private applicators, as well as pesticide dealers. While the core materials of required exams focus on pesticide safety and environmental concerns broadly, neonics have become a topic covered during recertification education. And so for an individual to maintain a pesticide license in the state, every 5 years, they must attend educational seminars and stay updated on pesticide knowledge, and that currently includes neonics. In addition, in recent years, exams required for supervisors of commercial applicators have also consistently covered bee health and neonic use. Finally, the division is able to enforce these regulations and licensing protocols through random field checks and implement various punishments for violations. While neonics are widely used, within the last decade, new studies have raised some concerns that there may be some downfalls, as neonics may have a negative impact on non-target organisms, specifically bees, also known as pollinators. There's currently some conflicting research as to the exact effects of neonics on the health of bees, and this is because experiments have been a little inconsistent in their methodology and then their outcomes as well. So however, the majority of laboratory and semi-field studies demonstrate that neonics are associated with increased mortality, impaired feeding, and reduced colony growth in bees. And in one lab setting showed that a connection between low doses of imidacloprid, which is one type of neonic, and colony collapse disorder, or CCD, which is a phenomenon in which bees abandon their hives during the winter and die. However, it should be noted that CCD has actually been declining since 2008 and can be caused by a number of different factors, including parasites, habitat loss, and environmental changes. So pinning CCD on neonic exposure alone would not capture that full picture. That being said, a recent report published by honeybee researchers at Cornell does highlight the risks of neonic exposure to honeybees. So using some hazard data, including toxicity, and then exposure data as metrics for risk, a wide-scale meta-analysis revealed that neonic-treated seeds specifically cause high risk to bees. And according to that report, in and near corn and soybean fields receiving pre-treated neonic seeds, 74% of exposures are likely to impact honeybee behavior. 58% are, physiology, 58% of exposures impact honeybee behavior, and 37% of exposures will impact honeybee reproduction. In addition, neonics may also impact humans in some harmful ways, and human exposure to neonics can come through contaminated food or drinking water or even occupational uses. And within one systematic review, chronic exposure studies reported some adverse health effects such as congenital heart disease and memory loss. However, exposure must be really significant for neonics to cause acute toxicological effects. And this is because neonics have been selected to be specific for acetylcholine receptors in insects, and they therefore show low affinity for vertebrate and human receptors and are less toxic to humans than older insecticides are. And neonics also typically do not pass the blood-brain barrier, which prevents toxins from getting to the space where neurons are in human brains. And this also reduces the potential for mammalian toxicity. And that concludes the section on neonic risk. I'll go ahead and pass it off to my colleague Paridi to discuss some of the potential benefits for neonics.
Thank you, Emily. So in addition to evaluating the potential risk to pollinators, we also evaluated potential benefits of neonicotinoids. And namely, we relied on the same study that Emily mentioned by honeybee researchers in Cornell, who examined the potential risk and benefit of neonic use or non-use in New York. And so they conducted economic analysis on crops in New York, and they examined over 5,000 paired trials on different crops in New York to examine the effects on crops. And so they conducted research on a number of different farms and found that majority of the trials conducted on fruits and vegetables showed that neonic use does in fact reduce pest populations, limit crop damage, or improve yield compared to untreated control plots. And so there is a significant benefit to farmers for using neonicotinoids. There's direct economic benefit that was found by this group of researchers. The one caveat that the researchers did find is that the potential benefits of neonicotinoids are more limited for certain crops compared to others. So in 83 to 97% of the field trials they examined, there was no significant increase or decrease in corn yield when neonicotinoid treated seeds were used compared to pyrethroid chemical alternatives or other untreated control seeds. So this translates to more infrequent economic benefits for corn farmers who use neonics. Yet as my colleague Emily mentioned, a significant portion of conventional field corn farmers do use neonic treated seeds. The study also found similar results for soybean crops, and they found that 82 to 89% of field trials found no increase or decrease in soybean yield compared to the chemical alternatives. And the EPA also released a study in 2014 that revealed that seed treatments provided negligible overall benefits to soybean production. So more research is needed on this topic, especially in relation to crops that are specific to New Hampshire. The study also could not account for differences between pest pressure and yield response associated with certain crops, which did vary between the farms. And the data did not also account for the insurance value of using neonics in a preventative manner. So more research is needed on this data to assess the potential economic benefits to farmers in New York, specifically for assorted vegetables, apples, hay, and sweet corn, which are major crops in New Hampshire. So now I'll pass it on to Jeremy, who will briefly give an overview of different states' regulations on neonics over the past few years.
Thanks, Bree. Next slide. Brady. Okay, sorry. So in our report, we also connected a cross-state analysis with states that have existing neonic regulation. Vermont passed HB 205 in 2018, which made neonics a restricted use pesticide, meaning that only state-certified applicators can use neonics. The bill was influenced by the significant increase in beehive colony loss in 2017. And the bill essentially banned consumer use and increased the annual registration fee for pesticides to offset inspection costs of pesticides and develop educational services. It also requires beekeepers to register with the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets and submit a pest mitigation plan. In 2014, Minnesota passed HF 2798, which focused on informing consumers about plants treated with neonics through labels. However, a large portion of neonic use in Minnesota goes unregulated through treated seeds, which evade federal regulation under the FIFRA. And like Vermont, Maryland passed legislation restricting the use of neonics in 2018 to only certified applicators. And finally, New York has the most recent proposed legislation, which was introduced in 2021. The Birds and Bees Protection Act proposes elimination of neonics where risks to pollinators outweigh economic benefits. The bill also proposes bans on neonic treated seeds for corn, soybean, and wheat crops, and other nuanced bans. Lastly, we also conducted somewhat of a case study examining the potential effects of neonic regulation on pollinator health in Connecticut. Connecticut was the first state to restrict the use of neonics in 2016, banning use by consumers through SB 231. Neonics under the bill are not allowed to be applied to plants that have bloomed unless they're in a greenhouse that's inaccessible to pollinators. The bill also sets up infrastructure to protect pollinator health, like the Pollinator Advisory Committee. They also mandated the model pollinator habitat education and interventions in deforested areas to help facilitate those habitats. Connecticut experienced a large percentage of bee colony loss at the beginning of 2015 through 2018, but that trend significantly decreased at the end of 2018. We were wondering how SB 231 impacted colonies specifically in terms of pesticide-related deaths. So we used the National Agricultural Statistics Service to compile averages on the table on this slide. Given that SB 231 passed in 2016, one might expect a steady decline in pesticide-related losses of colonies. However, as you can see, that trend decreased and then increased again. And this essentially elucidates the need for controlled experiments in the field and underscores the complexity of the situation, as bee colonies can be influenced by a variety of factors from climate change to predators, disease, weather, and so on. And to conclude, next slide, please. To conclude, our research has shown that the answer to neonic regulation isn't simple and linear. There are numerous stakeholders who may be impacted by regulation or non-regulation, and the complexity of the neonic usage and its effects make it even more difficult. There is a need for nuanced legislation that is science-based and addresses the concerns of the stakeholders involved. There are certainly economic benefits from the use of neonics. However, sometimes the benefits are negligible for crops such as corn and soybeans, in the case of New York. And all in all, whatever the committee decides on, it's clear that the regulation needs to be nuanced and context specific. Thank you.
I think we're now open to questions or comments from the committee.
All right, well, thank you. So a lot of information in there to try and digest quickly. I'm glad you sent the slides to the whole committee. So I guess we'll open it up to the committee and see if anyone has any questions. So any questions for Jeremy, Emily, or Paridi? Representative Aaron, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me? Everybody can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good, thank you. And thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. It was very informative and interesting. I do have a couple of questions, and my first question is I would direct to Emily. So in describing the study and the effects of neonics, I was wondering if the study was based on approved and proper use of pesticide versus the non-professional or uncontrolled use that's more, backyard farmer or smaller farmer or, flower gardens, that kind of thing.
Thank you so much for that question. From my understanding of this report, they were all controlled field studies. So they were done in the state of New York under New York regulations. And so it was less of the backyard kind of non-agricultural applications and more of controlled field crop studies on soybeans and corn, if that answers your question.
Okay, thank you. And another follow-up question.
Go ahead.
Yes, I have a question for Jeremy as well. When you were discussing, the pesticides usage, I was wondering, in other states that have restricted the use of these pesticides, were they then using alternative pesticides that perhaps were worse? Because, you know, there's several tools in our toolbox for how to control pests that attack different crops. And I'm wondering, you know, if we ban or restrict usage, would that then make people rely on pesticides that are worse for the environment, worse for our bees, and worse for the, you know, crops involved?
So we didn't collect data on alternative uses for in the states that at least have switched to neonic restrictions. A lot of those states I mentioned still utilize neonics. They're just more restricted to only certified applicators. So I'm not sure about the use of other alternatives, but I know that those states still use neonics. Just in many cases, they're just restricted. If that answers your question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Representative Hamola has a question.
Hi, Chair. Thank you so much for letting me speak, Chair. And thank you for this great presentation. I actually learned a lot. One of the things that I like how it focused on was the honeybee population, because I think that that's a real big issue, and it doesn't get a lot of attention sometimes, or at least get a lot of wide discussion. I'll say that from people who aren't in the scientific community. One of the things that I was kind of curious about, I would really like to see, first a comment, then a question, is I would really like to see if you all dig a little deeper into Vermont, Maryland, and those states that have restricted it, and maybe get a little deeper about how they restricted it and what alternatives people have been using since then, and what are maybe some outcomes, because that's always the benefit of trying to enter into any kind of new policy, is to understand what it looks like on the back end if there's some information for there. So if you guys have any information to that you'd work on next, that would be very interesting to hear. One of the questions that I have is that I understand that you were saying more study needs to be done in Connecticut to understand why their pest numbers sort of decreased and increased and varied. Do you all have any sort of anecdotal thoughts on that, or things that you might have come across that say aren't necessarily what you would put in a study, but something you would discuss? Because I'm just curious about that fluctuation. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I guess from a personal experience doing the research, and maybe Emily and Purdy can also add to this. It seems like that neonics are pretty the effects are just not very well understood, especially in regards to different types of plants. Like in some cases, they're a lot more economically beneficial than others, and some they're not at all, and they end up being more harmful. But the numbers seem to fluctuate because also there's a lot of other factors that are kind of confounding variables. So there's like weather, disease, human interference, climate change, predators. Like parasites were a huge threat to bee colonies. So I think it's hard to get concrete data, and even the data that is collected often has confounding variables. So I feel that there needs to be really controlled experiments to actually fully understand the effect of neonics on pollinator health moving forward, I think. Sorry, I don't know if that answered your question.
It did. Chair, may I have a follow-up?
Sure, one more. Go ahead.
I just quickly, I think that you're right. I think there's a lot of variables to that, and it would be really interesting to sort of approach this discussion in the future also. I'd be interested knowing, for instance, what plants are really affected by this and what aren't economically, which plants show benefit, what plants don't, because that actually might be very useful in tailoring any kind of restrictions for certain types of plants or certain types of plant use. I'm not speaking from perspective that, that I know much about restricting this at this point, but I just wanted to say that any specific information that you guys can provide in the future, I think would be very, very interesting and very, very helpful going forward when you're making any kind of policy decisions as we try to grapple with that. Thank you.
Definitely. And that's actually what New York did with the Birds and Bees Pollinator Act and Birds and Bees Protection Act. And they used Cornell to follow up on that study and see which crops were effective and which weren't. And I think a similar study would be really useful for New Hampshire, just to learn about the specific context of New Hampshire and which plants are the most beneficial with neonics. Yeah. So thank you for your question, for your comment.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take one more from Representative Bixby, and then in the interest of time, we'll have to move on to the next section. So Representative Bixby.
Okay, so one thing that you didn't, I don't think you mentioned in the presentation, but was in your was in the written report, was that there was something about neonicotinoids ending up in the being measurable in the fruits and vegetables that they had been used on. So if you were, for instance, if it was a squash, then there would be traces of the neonics in the squash long after the pesticide had been used. And I was wondering if you could give a little bit more information on that, and also some information on whether there are restrictions about whether you can use neonics, within a certain time of flowering.
Sure, I can speak a little bit to that. Thank you for that question. So it is the current mechanism behind translocation of pesticides in plants is pretty unknown or poorly known. But I think what you were mentioning in the report was that we cited that one study in 2005 found that some plants or some vegetables specifically, such as leafy vegetables and tomatoes and cucumbers, have higher amounts of neonic residues than others. And unfortunately, with this study, there was no indication of what the application method of the neonic was. So that is something that certainly needs additional research. But in terms of how neonics are taken up by plants, we do know that neonic compounds are often kind of dispersed throughout the environment instead of being actually taken up by the plant. One study found that only about 5% of the active ingredient of neonics are actually taken up by the plants, and a lot of that other residue and also chemical compound kind of is within the soil and then can also lead to pesticide drift. So those are certainly concerns, but again, the impacts of that on humans is a little unknown, because while neonics do have lower mammalian toxicity, kind of the extent of exposure and the resulting harm from that, there's not a ton of literature currently.
Thank you.
I also, wanted to briefly mention, I think this got skipped over in the presentation, but when we were speaking to pollinator health experts, they expressed an interest in clarifying some of the language around what Emily was talking about. So I think some of the language around bee toxic pesticides and whether they're systemic is kind of at dispute between different fields. And so systemic could refer to something that is long lasting in the environment or something that is taken up fully by the plant. And I think the confusion of that term, perhaps in previous legislation about the bill or just general legislation throughout the country, has kind of confused the policy regarding that. So I think maybe clarification as well as additional research would help in that regard.
Thank you very much. All right, Dr. Shako, I guess we'll move on to the next section. We're a little after 9:30.
Yep, we've got Kelly and Frandy. I'll talk a bit about sustainable waste management in New Hampshire. So I'll turn it over to Frandy and Kelly.
All right. Can everybody see that, the presentation?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Frandy, and I'm here with my teammate Kelly today, and we just want to thank you guys for giving us a chance to present our investigation on solid waste management in New Hampshire. It means a lot to us that you took the time out of your day to listen to us. To start off, solid waste management in New Hampshire has fallen far behind that of neighboring states and the nation as a whole within the past decades. And this primarily can be attributed to the budget cuts that the Department of Environmental Services Solid Waste Management Bureau has experienced. Over a decade ago, this bureau had a planning and community assistance section whose duty was to oversee each municipality to ensure that they were receiving adequate assistance on solid waste management. Yet to date, the section finds itself with only one active position. The lack of resources for each municipality has also left them without a standardized procedure with regards to managing municipal solid waste and has contributed to the state's landfill capacity rapidly dwindling. This is all exacerbated by the fact that the last solid waste management plan of the state was published in 2003, leaving municipalities to decide what the best practices are for themselves, which proves to be a difficult endeavor. It's also worth noting here that RSA 149M states that the Bureau has to update their solid waste management plan every 6 years. However, that is not reflected in the current reality of New Hampshire. And here we can see that there are currently only 6 operating landfills in New Hampshire, with 3 being public and 3 of them being private. And it's worth noting here that 50% of the solid waste disposed in these private landfills comes from out of state, particularly Massachusetts, which has now an extensive plan to reduce the amount of solid waste in their own state by 90% by the year 2050, which just worsens the current problem here in Massachusetts. And here in New Hampshire. 4 of these landfills are expected to have their earliest anticipated closure date within the next decade, as depicted by the graph. Evidently, New Hampshire needs to do something now if it wants to address the rapid decrease in the state's landfill capacity that could shape the future. For these reasons, we ultimately decided that we wanted to investigate what techniques New Hampshire could potentially utilize as alternatives to landfills and to reduce the volume of solid waste produced overall. Also, for each of the alternatives we kept in consideration how economically and environmentally sustainable they were for the state. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about landfill gas to energy. This is the first alternative disposal method to landfills that we investigated. And though this alternative does not directly reduce the volume of solid waste in landfills, landfill gas to energy facilities can make existing landfills more environmentally sustainable by repurposing the landfill gas released by solid waste. For context, landfill gas is composed of approximately 50% methane and 50% carbon dioxide, which are detrimental to the environment. What landfill gas to energy facilities do is that they capture this gas through a series of wells and focus on drawing out the methane, since it could be repurposed into energy. This gas is then compressed and chilled to draw out any liquids through condensation and is converted into energy through either electricity generation, direct use of the medium, or turn it into renewable natural gas. The resulting energy can then be sold to nearby clients or be used in the facility itself to lower its own emissions and reliance on other fuels, as well as costs. One main benefit of these facilities is that they reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Municipal solid waste landfills are the 3rd largest human-generated source of methane emission in the US. And so reducing these emissions from landfill helps mitigate global climate change. Another benefit is that they repurpose landfill gas in sustainable ways that can bring about health and safety benefits to local communities. They also reduce the odors that are emitted by landfills and lessen any explosion hazards that can result from the gas accumulation in these landfills. And lastly, the generated energy from these facilities can also be sold to nearby clients, creating new revenue streams for these municipalities. Building these units also creates a bunch of new jobs related to the facility design, construction, and operation. For our investigation specifically, we honed in on a landfill gas to energy facility already operating in the state at the Turnkey Recycling and Environmental Enterprise Facility, and another operating a central landfill in Johnston, Rhode Island. And to the right, we can see a little bit more information on central landfill, like how it generates 33.4 megawatts annually, reduces carbon emissions by 1.27 million, and saves 2.1 trillion BTU per year. We discovered that while many landfills in New Hampshire have the appropriate equipment to have landfill gas to energy facilities, many of them do not participate in the endeavor that has been particularly beneficial to at the aforementioned facilities. Both of these facilities tend to show how effective landfill gas to energy is with representatives from these facilities saying that the project paid itself back within a decade. It's also worth noting here that another revenue stream in New Hampshire for the energy generated in these facilities is through renewable energy credits that the state offers. There are currently 2 landfill gas to energy candidates in New Hampshire. One is in Lebanon and the other one is in Bethlehem. Some considerations that the state must deliberate on before implementing alternatives is 1, which technology will best fit for a facility, which will depend on the landfill gas that's generated there. 2, it must compare the costs and benefits and determine what is the most cost-effective method and whether it will eventually pay itself out as it usually does. And 3, it must determine the overall economic and environmental impact on New Hampshire. Now I'm going to turn it over to my teammate Kelly, who's going to talk a little bit more about waste to energy in New Hampshire.
Yeah, so another way of dealing with all the solid waste produced in New Hampshire is through waste to energy technology. Mass burn incineration is the most commonly used waste to energy technology, with 75 operating plants in the US currently. In these plants, trash is sorted to move any hazardous materials or recyclables. And then there is a large scale combustion. The heat generated from this is used to convert water into steam, turning a turbine generator, which produces energy. The ash generated from this is then filtered for any other material that could be burned again and sent, and what's left over is sent to the landfill, which is much smaller in mass than the original solid waste. So that would help reduce the volume of solid waste going into the landfills. These plants actually remove greenhouse gas emissions by 1 ton of carbon dioxide equivalent for every ton of waste diverted from the landfill, instead of the methane being released into the atmosphere from landfills. This is being converted to carbon dioxide as it's burned, and some of the new carbon capture technologies make this actually fairly clean way to deal with solid waste. They also have high economic benefits, with studies projecting that $1.77 is injected into the economy for every dollar of revenue generated by the waste to energy sector. We looked at the Wheeler Concord facility for waste to energy, which is the picture on the right, as well as a solid waste management renewable energy facility in Palm Beach County, Florida. The plant in Concord processes 191,600 tons of waste per year. And the energy from that powers over 14,000 homes and saves about 195,000 barrels of oil every year. So despite the fact that there's one waste to energy plant in New Hampshire, building another one isn't the most viable option for how to reduce solid waste in New Hampshire, just because the nature of the size of the amount of solid waste you need to make this worth it. New Hampshire is a pretty spread out state. It works in Concord, which is one of the more densely populated areas. So that's a limitation. And right now on New Hampshire's hierarchy of solid waste management, incineration is low. So they would also need to move that up and make it a more favorable way of managing waste in New Hampshire for this to be viable. And then the other way, if we're not creating new facilities, we can reduce the waste that is being created. Right now, 35% of New Hampshire's waste is recycled or composted, when it could be up to 80%. So one solution is passing more comprehensive recycling legislation. We looked at examples in other states. Vermont is one of them that has a pretty comprehensive universal recycling law, which bans blue bin recyclables, leaves and yard debris and food waste, all from going into the trash in Vermont. It establishes a pay-as-you-throw policy. Some of the parts like the food scrap ban were phased in to give time for the infrastructure to build up. And it did come at a significant cost. It cost the state of Vermont about $5 million a year to have this policy. But even if New Hampshire is not ready to implement a full comprehensive law like this. There are many parts of the universal recycling law that could be adopted into New Hampshire to reduce waste. Another piece of this of recycling is glass recycling and bottle bills. Right now, most recycling in New Hampshire is single stream, which means the glass is too contaminated to be sold back to glass companies. So with passing a bottle bill, which they have in Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, and Vermont, the glass collected could be cleaner and able to be sold back. And another thing New Hampshire is doing with glass is working with the NRRA. It has a program where they crush recycled glass down and incorporate it into roads. And so expanding that program could help divert some waste from landfills. And then finally, a lot of waste in New Hampshire comes from out of state. In 2018, 49% of the solid waste that was filling up New Hampshire's landfills came from out of state. So by reducing or disincentivizing states from bringing their waste to New Hampshire, we could reduce the amount of waste going into landfills. One state we looked at as an example was Ohio. They have a surcharge for waste that comes in from out of state that's higher than the in-state cost to disincentivize out of state dump. So the landfills in New Hampshire are filling up. 4 of them have plans to close in the next decade, but the rate of solid waste being produced is not slowing down. So something needs to be done about this issue. And we came up with some recommendations. First is to update the solid waste management plan. As Frandy touched upon, this hasn't been revised since 2003. A lot has changed since 2003, so this needs some updating. More funding could be provided to the Solid Waste Management Bureau of the Department of Environmental Services. Past budget cuts have left it virtually unable to do its job managing the waste in the state properly. New Hampshire could construct additional landfill gas to energy facilities in their landfill. Like Frandy said, there are 2 landfills that are ready to, or it's like very feasible to implement this technology, could stimulate the economy with job creations and help ameliorate the effects of climate change and lower fuel costs. New Hampshire can investigate and update their solid waste hierarchy. Waste to energy is low, but the technology around waste to energy has changed a lot recently. It's gotten a lot cleaner, so that could be updated. New Hampshire could revisit, update, and pass new legislation regarding recycling and waste management and encourage more recycling and more diverting waste from landfills. In regard to the glass recycling, roads regulated by the Department of Transportation, so that's more state roads, are they require the glass to be crushed up so finely that it's hard for the NRRA to meet those standards. Right now, they can only meet the standards of roads regulated by the Department of Environmental Services. So if the Department of Transportation regulations were studied and potentially updated to be something that the NRRA could feasibly meet, we could potentially incorporate more recycled glass into roads. A surcharge could be imposed on out-of-state waste deposited in New Hampshire landfills, and that revenue could be put back into waste management in New Hampshire. And finally, New Hampshire could continue to partner with organizations like the NRRA, who are coming up with creative solutions to deal with waste management to develop sustainable strategies. And that's all we have, and we'll take questions now.
Great, thank you both very much. Kelly, I assume that you guys probably looked at the legislation that we've been working on currently, House Bill 413 and Senate Bill 146. Have you guys taken a look at those? And because those are sort of in the area of updating our recycling goals. Did you get a chance to review those?
Yeah, I have seen those. Mm-hmm.
Good. So we're starting to follow some of your recommendations already.
Yeah.
And Frandy, I had one question for you as well. So you talked about the landfill gas, turning it into electricity program. So why don't more of the New Hampshire landfills participate in that program if they're able to?
From my understanding, they have a little bit of a complication deciding what specific technology works best for them. And also, a lot of the times they assume that the best technology is the one that fits bigger facilities, which is like reciprocating engines. In reality, however, it has come up to date that microturbines are actually super helpful for smaller facilities because you can scale up the size and also not waste as much money as you would if you were to build a facility that was far larger than the landfill gas that was generated at the facility itself.
Okay, so it's more of a capital investment issue than a revenue issue?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'll open it up. Representative Murray, you have a question?
Yeah, I do. Thank you for the presentation. And having served on a previous study committee in the legislature, I think much of what you were saying definitely resonates. So I appreciate the time that you have taken. One question I did have with regard to the solid waste hierarchy that you mentioned and updating that, my understanding is that the state, while the State Department of DES and the US EPA work very closely together in outlining that hierarchy. So I'm just curious how flexible you feel, because a lot of these things are highly regulated at the federal level. So I'm just curious what kind of flexibility you might see a State Department amending that hierarchy.
Yeah, from our conversation with the Palm Beach County Waste to Energy Facility, we understood that because there has been so many different changes in the technology that they use with regards to waste to energy facilities, things have been more environmentally friendly and the EPA has been more open to having it higher on the hierarchy. For example, I think they had a condensation process at the end of the filtering process now, just to kind of take the water that is generated from any excess steam that is generated from the turbines and turn it into water to reduce any greenhouse gas emissions. Kelly, do you have anything?
We didn't look at exactly in our project. I don't think I came across exactly how much of that is federally regulated. So I don't think we fully have the answer to that.
No problem. I appreciate it. Thank you. And then follow up, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Sure, go ahead.
One other question that I did have was with regard to your interest in glass. And so some of the things I think you were talking about were with regard to glass cullet, but then it sounded like you were also talking about potential programs around glass bottling. And is that something you took a look at as far as feasibility of programs within the state of New Hampshire versus our neighboring states? Or I'm curious to know if there's more information there.
Yeah, so a lot of, as I mentioned, 4 other New England states have these programs, and it's essentially the sort of just like bottle return programs specifically for glass. It seems like a pretty feasible thing to do. It showed in the other states having high economic returns, and there is a market right now for recycled glass. It just needs to be clean and not contaminated with other materials. And this seems like a way you get back much cleaner recycled glass.
Okay, thank you very much.
Right, Representative Aaron, did you have a question?
Yes, it did. Thank you. And I'd like to direct this to Kelly specifically. You were talking a lot about recycling.
Mm-hmm.
And as we've seen with China exiting the recycling of plastics market, recycling only works if you have an entity or a marketplace who will take the waste to process it. So what do you suggest to encourage businesses to enter this space that's been created? And also coupling that with, what if there's unsuitable technology to handle those recyclable items, like certain plastics? I mean, we've got a problem where we want to encourage recycling to happen, but there's no marketplace to bring those items to convert them to something else that's usable.
Yeah, we definitely came across that issue in doing our research with China's new policy. That's why we focused and had that section about glass, because we found that was one of the places there were more feasible solutions in a better market for. Honestly, we found that you're kind of right, that it's a hard time for plastics right now, and did not find a lot about plastic recycling. But something else we did find was paper recycling. And like, as time passes since China's national spirit policy has been passed, paper recycling facilities are starting to be built in the US, even in the Northeast. I think in Pennsylvania, someone we talked to was telling us about how that industry, it's taking time to build up the infrastructure, but the infrastructure is being built up, particularly for glass and paper. It seems like plastic recycling is taking a longer time for the markets to respond to that.
Follow up.
Sure, go ahead.
And so do you believe the problem there with the plastic recycling is that we're still waiting for certain technologies to emerge that will handle those kinds of plastics in a better way than they've been managed?
I think so. And for infrastructure to shift and build up in the United States was so dependent on shipping everything to China. It's taking some time for for the United States to figure out how to handle that recyclables on their own.
Okay, thank you so much. That was a very, very well done presentation, by the way. And my thanks to all of you who worked on it.
All right, Representative Bixby.
Yes, thank you for taking my question. Actually, this is not my question, but Representative Kaplan was not able to attend today, and he had a couple of questions based on the written reports, and one of them has to do with waste to energy. And he noted that there's been some issues in Europe that, although the energy conversion technology is working fairly well, there is an issue with trace pollutants like dioxins in the exhaust gases that then get into the environment and bioaccumulate. And he was wondering if you had any more information in terms of ways of dealing with those small but highly toxic pollutants that might still be coming out of the exhaust gases.
Yeah, well, our project did not entirely focus on Europe's methodology. I will say that something that did come up repeatedly in our conversations with Palm Beach County, the waste to energy facility over there, was that they implemented an air condensation process at the end of the whole incineration process to just ensure that the steam that was coming out that has a bunch of greenhouse gas emissions was getting condensated and turned into water, just to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that get emitted into the atmosphere overall. But I don't have a specific way of telling what's going on in Europe.
Okay, and his other question was in terms of diversion strategies, and he was wondering if you had looked at using specific bans like bans on single-use plastics.
I don't think we fully got into depth on bans on single-use plastics. It's something I came across a little bit in looking at other states' policies, but not something we went super in-depth into in our report.
Thank you. And this has been a very, both groups have done a great job on your report. So very impressed with your work. Thank you.
All right, Representative Hamol.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to say thank you both for this really relevant presentation. The one question I did have, quick question, is that you had mentioned that some of the neighboring states around us are you know, they have ambitious goals to reduce their waste. And I'm just wondering if those goals also incorporate the amount of waste they ship to other states like us, or if they're meeting those goals without accounting for that. And I don't know if your research indicated any of that. Thank you.
Yeah, so from my understanding from our research, it was that Massachusetts in particular, they are trying to reach a 30% reduction in annual disposal by 2030 and 90% by 2050. And I understand that this does include out-of-state waste diverting it. They have banned a bunch of different hazardous material, and they've also placed a ban on food waste ban, which I believe is now getting sent to New Hampshire, some of it. And I also know that with regards to Vermont as well, they only have one landfill and they actually do not take any out-of-state waste, and that might also get diverted to New Hampshire because there is no surcharge, which Kelly probably knows a lot more on.
Yeah, no, that's definitely an issue. Massachusetts is cracking down on what and how much can go into their landfills. And a lot of this happens through the private companies. Casella works in both Massachusetts and New Hampshire, and instead of putting the waste into the Massachusetts landfills, is just shipping it up to their New Hampshire landfills.
Thank you.
Okay, and Representative Stapleton, you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question. Did I hear you correctly to say that the waste coming in to New Hampshire from out of state was 49%?
Yeah. To
In
50%.
In 2018, 49% municipal solid waste came from out of state.
Thank you. Follow up, Mr. Chair?
Sure, go ahead.
Vermont seems to be quite a ways ahead of us in controlling the various aspects of waste and recycling. How much percent do you know of out-of-state waste comes into Vermont? And if they've restricted it, how did they do that?
They have not restricted it, but we believe it's because there's only one landfill in Vermont and it is owned by Casella. And just because it is such a small state, it's the central landfill for the whole state. I guess they just decided to not take any out-of-state waste, which clearly affects New Hampshire because if it doesn't go there, it comes here.
Thank you.
Yeah, and a lot of that is like decisions being made within private companies.
Very good, thank you.
Okay, any further questions from the committee?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I did have one question.
Go ahead, Representative Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you guys for taking my question. I guess to sort of piggyback on Rep. Stapleton's question and expand on that a little bit, did you guys differentiate at all between public and private landfills? Because I am wondering if some of that information might affect what type of waste is taken in certain places and what flexibility there is to regulate some of that.
Yeah, so most of the out-of-state waste we understood is coming into the private landfills just because they have more flexibility of what waste they actually accept. It's because of the Commerce Clause in the Constitution itself that the state really cannot regulate a whole lot about what their business endeavors are. However, there has been a lot of community opposition where these landfills are located just because it's becoming increasingly clear that they're less serving the constituents and more serving just their business needs.
Thank you very much.
Okay, looks like we're back for a second round. Representative Amola.
I'm sorry, just a quick follow-on, Chair. Casella, since Casella is in Vermont and Vermont doesn't take any out-of-state waste, then how does that affect that interstate compact with regard to them since they're private companies?
I don't think our project really covered that just because it is really hard to find out what is going on in between their own private business. Sure. And yeah, but from my understanding, it probably has to do with some agreement that they themselves have between themselves, that they see this being the most beneficial method for them at least.
Okay, so you're thinking that it's an agreement between Casella and Vermont, or
more
Yeah.
so Casella.
States can like flat out say we're not taking any waste from out of state. I believe that is an issue also with the Commerce Clause.
Okay, I'll have to do a little more research on that. I don't know. I'm not fully understanding of all that, but thank you very much.
Right, Representative Bixby, you have another question?
Yes. This is actually a follow-up on Representative Humela's question in terms of, so Vermont does have some restrictions in terms of organic waste going into landfills, and I think maybe also construction debris. And would those bans create a disincentive for Casella to bring waste from out of state into Vermont?
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions for our presenters today? All right, seeing none, I want to thank you all, Professor Shako, Jeremy, Emily, Paridi, Kelly, Randy, you all did a wonderful job. This has been very enlightening, and we certainly appreciate all of the information that you've passed on to us, and look forward to future projects, perhaps teaming up with you guys. So if you want to do any more legwork for us, let us know. We'll probably find a few more things for you to study.
Most definitely. Just let us know what you've got, and we'll be glad to dig into it.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. It is 10:07. I'm going to take about a 5-minute recess here, and then we're going to move on with the committee discussing the retained bills that we have. So we'll be back on in like 10:12. Okay, it is 10:12. I'm going to bring the committee back out of recess. And we'll have a discussion about the retained bills. We have 5 retained bills that we have kept in committee. And we have some time in May available to us that we could work on some of these. We can't actually exec anything out of committee until a little bit later into the fall, but we can do the legwork on any of these that we choose to now. So I kind of wanted to discuss with the committee about what our thoughts were going forward and kind of share with you my thoughts. And Representative Bixby and I had a conversation yesterday, and good news is we were on the same page. So this should go fairly easy. So I'll kind of go through the list and one by one, and I'll share with you my thoughts, and Representative Bixby and others, you're more than welcome to jump in and fill in with your own thoughts if you'd like. So House Bill 366 is, I have the bill right in front of me. Yeah, that's the animal hoarding, sorry. Thank you. That is that bill is one that I sponsored, and I asked the committee to retain it originally because I knew there was some more work we wanted to look at, especially in the criminal justice area of it. I have reached out to the AKC, Stacy Ober, and to one of the other folks, Eileen Landis, that gave testimony, and spoken with them about providing us with some thoughts and their recommendations on areas that need some work in the bill too. So I think that's a bill that we can look at working on this month and get some of that at least underway, even if we can't get to where the committee wants to be completely. So I guess I'll open it up. Representative Bixby, do you have any further comments you'd like to make on that?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that's convenient about that for being able to start work on it immediately is that there are no budget impacts. So whatever is uncertain in terms of the budget doesn't really impact how we go about this one. And I think that one of the things that we can do is think about specific people who would be able to address some of the sticking points that had been raised in the public hearing, and bring those people in to help us as witnesses in our work sessions.
Absolutely agree. My intent is we'll send this bill to the subcommittee for animal protection and licensure, and we'll assemble that subcommittee and allow them to take a look at it. Any further comments on this from any of the members?
Yeah, just for those people who are, we haven't done much subcommittee work this term. So just for those who are new to this, when there's a subcommittee, the subcommittee members are the ones who get to weigh in when it's time to vote on the recommendation. But every member of the full committee is welcome to come and join, and generally the chair of the subcommittee is happy to allow those people to ask questions and make comments as it goes along.
Great point. And I believe I did send out subcommittee list assignments to everyone. If I did not, let me know and I will send them out again. The Animal Protection and Licensure Subcommittee members are, follow this, it's on a wide sheet here. It's myself, Representative Aaron, Representative Bixby, Representative Kennedy, Representative Davis, Representative Von Plinsky, Representative Highland, and Representative Perez. Those would be the members of the Animal Protection Subcommittee. Okay, sorry, when I print it out, it's a little hard to follow across. Okay, any further thoughts or comments on House Bill 366? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to House Bill 367, which is the quarantine bill. That again is a bill that is the relative to animal health certificates and quarantine requirements for animals imported into the state. That again is a bill that I sponsored. I would like to hold that bill right now. I think that there's some other bills that are going through process that are relative to similar areas, and I'd like to let them sort of clear the pipeline before we commenced any further work on this bill here. I don't think there's anything urgent that needs to be acted upon right now. So I think it'll be my request of the committee that we just hold that bill into the fall and we get an idea of the landscape of where we are with the database and the House Bill 250 and House Bill 249. We've got several others that are working in the same area that I'd like to let them get through. Any thoughts or comments from the rest of the committee?
I agree entirely with that.
Thank you, Representative Bixby. Anyone else? All right, seeing none, I think that's the way we will proceed. Okay, the next bill is House Bill 438. That's relative to the confidentiality of animal records databases. This bill, as a refresher for the committee, was sort of dealt with a piece of what the House Bill 532 did that Representative Bixby sponsored that we moved forward as a committee and has now been included into House Bill 2. This House Bill 438 just dealt with one section on confidentiality, and it was our agreement as a committee that we would hold on to that bill and sort of keep it as a placeholder in the event that there were anything that we decided came out of House Bill 532 that we needed to fix later on. I think right now we've got a really good compromise with the Senate on language in what we have put into the budget, and they're currently looking it over again as they look through all of HB2. But my understanding is we're in a good spot being in an agreement on that language. So it would be my recommendation that we hold on to this bill to the fall, House Bill 438, and see if there's any further work that we need to do in the animal records database area. Any other comments from members of the committee? Well, you're all agreeable today. This is pretty easy. Okay, House Bill 585. This is allowing the prepayment of dog licensing fees for the duration of a rabies vaccination and reducing fines related thereto. Actually, Representative Bixby, why don't you speak to this one? You and I talked at length about this yesterday.
Yeah, I think that this one, I think well, we decided to retain this because the bill as written had some problems, and the idea of potentially making it possible for people to get a 3-year license instead of 1 year license has some appeal to it. It's figuring out the details of how that would work, and also making sure that whatever we do would be workable on the municipal level. So I think we're going to need to get some input from municipalities on whether they would find this useful or beneficial or problematic, or whether they would like to have it as enabling legislation rather than a mandate. So those are possibilities. So I think that we should do some more discussion of it. I don't see any reason that we would need to wait until the fall to start thinking about it.
Thank you. And we as a committee received some a communication from the bill sponsor, Representative Leon, that she's very willing to work with us as a committee to looking at and address the issues and concerns that were raised in the hearing and any further ones that we may raise. So it is my feeling, I'm in agreement with Representative Bixby, that this is a bill that we could start working on here in May as well. And so I will also assign that to the subcommittee on animal protection and licensure, and we'll have that bill that they can also take a look at. Representative Aaron, did you have some thoughts?
Yeah, no, I just had a quick question as to why was 3 years chosen instead of, say, 2 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that'll be a good one to ask when we get into the subcommittee, and we'll take a look at it.
I could actually clarify that because the rabies vaccination is good for 3 years.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, again, I agree. There's some real, the concept has merit. There were just some questions raised and concerns and raised, and I think we as the subcommittee and consequently the full committee after can take a look at that and see if we can come up with a workable path forward, or at least some further information. Any further comments from the committee members? All right, seeing none, we'll go on to House Bill 627, which establishes a value-added grant matching fund for New Hampshire agricultural producers. Representative Bixby and I talked at great length about this yesterday, and I think I will actually give the floor to him again on this bill. He has a lot of background and good working information on it. So go ahead, Representative Bixby.
So, this is another bill that where what happens in the budget will probably have an impact on whether it's feasible, to what degree it would be feasible. Anything that involves money is obviously has some complications. Where we would find funding for this fund is an open question, and having the budget settled would give us an easier basis for being able to make those assessments. So I think that we should hold off until the fall to look at this further. I'm thinking it may actually be something where we decide that it would make more sense to set up a study committee to look into it more deeply in terms of both the mechanisms for funding and also the mechanisms for figuring out how the granting works and whether it should be a grant fund or a loan fund, that sort of thing. So I think that there are also, we had some people who testified in the public hearing who can probably give us some good input in terms of how we might want to further develop it. So it's got potential, but I don't think we can work on it right now.
Great, thank you, Representative Bixby. I concur. I think that's a wise choice for us as a committee to just hold on to this again a little longer. Any other comments from members of the committee on House Bill 627? All right, seeing none. So we have two bills then that we will send to the Subcommittee for Animal Protection and Licensure, House Bill 585 and House Bill 366. We are able to meet on Thursdays very freely because there is no other committee meetings on Thursdays because of the Senate hearings. So there's no scheduled hearings on bills. There's only some subcommittee hearings. Does Thursdays work for those members who will be on that committee? Is there a specific time or date that works better for any of you? Is there any input on that?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure that there are a couple of members who are not here today, possibly because it's because of conflict. So it might be good to send that as an email to the members of the committee to get a sense of, and it might be a matter, one thing that might make a difference is whether it's in the morning or the afternoon.
Sure.
So I think that might be a better sorted out by email.
We can do that. Great idea. All right, that is all that I had to discuss. I just wanted to kind of go over those things as a full committee while we were here after the presentation. And again, I think the students did a wonderful job in the information that they presented, and I'm very thankful that they were able to do that for us. Any further information that anybody in the committee would like to bring up before we adjourn?
Yeah, I think, Howard, you and I had talked about possibly getting various people from UNH, particularly from COLSA, to give a presentation on how the work they do would have an impact on the work we do in our committee. And I was wondering if you'd had any more progress in setting up that.
I haven't, but it is on my list of things to do. I need to get on that and see if we can set up a date to do that, because I think it'd be very beneficial for the committee to get that input. It's something that, for those of you who are new, that we traditionally do early on, but because of the limitations that we had with the bandwidth on these Zoom licenses, I didn't choose to take the time early in the session, because the time that we had available for it was needed by other committees with an awful lot of early bills. So we're kind of doing it a little bit backwards this year. We did our hearings first, and we'll do our presentations after. But I will work on getting that organized and certainly keep you all up to date. Anything else from members of the committee before we adjourn? All right. Well, then we will adjourn the meeting here at 10:28, and I appreciate all of your time, and we'll be in touch as we go forward. Thank you all.
Thank you, Chair.